Good evening or early morning. Let's just say hi to Candy the Wonder Pup. You good girl. Good. Shake a paw. Come on up. Here, pup. Good girl. There you go. Now she'll be happy. It is 12:43 on now. It is Monday, very early Monday morning. 12:43 a.m. Apologize. I was going to do this at 12:15, but as so often happens, life stuff starts happening, and so I had to delay. Again, Gordon Causey on Facebook, on Twitter, Gordy Canuck on Reddit, Grow a Set, and the usual. If you like, give a thumb. If you want to subscribe, I do these from time to time. Now my dog has to start going ape. You know what? Come here. Quiet. Oh, she's got to start barking. I apologize. Anyway, let's get right to what I want to talk about and what's coming in 2023 in the coming year. And I think it's going to be a challenging year. In 2019, I don't think anyone foresaw what we were going to be going through. And if anyone did, they certainly weren't talking about it in terms of COVID coming and lockdowns and masks. And then in 2022, all of a sudden a jab developed after just a few short months. And then that jab being forced pretty much onto people, coerced into taking it, whether they wanted it or not, in order to work, play sports, to simply participate in society. You had to have your vaccine passport. That died out, thankfully, for the most part in Canada in March of 2022, but little remnants of it remained. I think it was like September or October. You still were required to have one up until September, October to travel. As far as I'm aware, if you want to go into the United States, you still have to show proof of COVID vaccination. I've heard anecdotal stories of people going across at land borders, and it seems to be hit and miss. I was just talking to a pastor friend of mine who knows a number of people who have gone across, and he said it's about 50-50 among the people he knows who've tried to go across the border. So, I look on 2020, that was the year of lockdowns and masks. The year 2021 was the year of the jab, and into early 2022. And now what are we looking at in 2023 is I think we're looking at a lot of illness, a lot of disease, a lot of death. And of course, non-expert opinion, I don't think the real reason will ever hit the mainstream. And a big question a lot of people seem to have is, are we going to be seeing lockdowns again? Mandates. And I don't know. But a thought has occurred to me that it could be lockdowns could be used as a threat, because as things stand now in Canada, I would guesstimate that somewhere around 3 to 4 million Canadians are unjabbed, and then probably another 7, 8, 9 million are not up to date on their boosters. And I could see the threat of a lockdown or those types of measures being used as an ominous threat. That is to say, Well, we really don't want to lock down, but we may be forced to, given the fact that millions of Canadians have not had even one shot, and millions more are not yet up to date on their boosters. I see I have at least one person watching. If you want to chime in, if you think my thoughts are reasonable, if you see that same potential, because I don't see any let up in terms of the manner in which they're pushing these jabs. Canada's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Theresa Tam, just did this editorial opinion disgusting video in which she was selling the jabs to children with a little mocked up conversation she was having with Mrs. Santa Claus. And Mrs. Santa Claus was talking about how both she and Santa himself are fully jabbed and boosted and all up to date. Like, that was, cringe. It doesn't begin to describe. But they're not letting up in terms of this, in terms of pushing them. And this is even after we know. I mean, I don't think anyone, and I think precious few people, thought that when a lot of people signed up and got their 2, thinking, all right, I'll get my 2 and I'm done and that's it. And now, unaware that they were signing up for, the message at the beginning was that they would provide, that the jabs would provide long lasting, durable, sustained immunity to infection. This was the end. The virus stops with each person who's had the jab. The virus stops. It cannot infect them. It cannot go on to another person. That was the mainstream narrative that was promulgated far and wide. And it convinced a lot of people, I've had every other jab. I've had MMR, polio, malaria, tetanus, diphtheria, whatever. Sure, give me the COVID one too. Why not? I'll get it done with and I'm over. Well, as everyone knows now, I don't know how many weeks or months it is between jabs, but if you've gone, certainly if it's been 6 months since you've been jabbed, well, you're no longer up to date. You're no longer, according to some authorities that I'm reading, if you're basically unvaccinated at that point because all your supposed protection is gone. And I am sharing on my Facebook feed just countless stories of typically often younger, healthy people suffering from, dying in their sleep, heart attacks, seizures, strokes. And you can bet dollars to donuts. There's one gentleman, I think he's a television personality. If I look, I can find his name. Dax Tejera, ABC's This Week executive producer, dies at 37. I must have shared, over the last 2 days or 3 days, a dozen of these stories that go onto my timeline. I just shared one just today about a 16-year-old who in the last few months had started experiencing seizures and then passed away in her sleep at 16 years of age. That was that one that I just shared. I'm just scrolling down. There's Dax. Then there's an obituary for Dr. Hani Youssef, another Canadian doctor who died suddenly and unexpectedly. Then there's Charles B. Dean's cause of death confirmed by coroner after her sudden death at 32. Yes, this one, they said that she died due to a car accident that she had 13 years ago. Tori Spelling has been hospitalized because she's having a hard time breathing. She was famous for being the daughter of Aaron Spelling, and on the hit teen show of, I think it would be the 90s, Beverly Hills 90210. Then there's an 18-year-old bull rider who passed away from a rare disease called mono Epstein-Barr virus. You can read up on that. Just type in as Epstein-Barr virus reactivation after COVID-19 vaccination to the PubMed, NCBI, NLM, NIH.gov, National Institutes of Health. Franco Harris, another one, who had actually done public service type advertising, telling people to get jabbed. He passed away suddenly. The numbers are just mind-blowing, how many of these we're seeing. Melbourne principal dies after short illness. Quanah grandson Ron Parker succumbs to brief illness. And these stories are just all over the place. Story from a while back about a woman whose legs were amputated days after getting her COVID shots. About a 20-year-old at Ohio State University. Family mourning, sudden death of OSU student. And it just goes on and on and on. And the thing is, these are stories that are written of in the press. And when COVID first hit March, April, May, June, early 2020, I kept asking people, do you know of anyone who's gotten this? Because I didn't know anyone. I had no firsthand direct knowledge of a single person who'd gotten the bug. And invariably, in the overwhelming number of cases, when I asked people, do you know anyone? It was always no one. I've got rhinoceros or something like that, or rhino Arius. It's scary when you realize that all these health issues popping up is just the beginning. What will happen in 5 to 10 years from now? This is principally at the beginning. This is one of my biggest reasons behind not taking the shot, is the absence of any long-term safety profile. You cannot establish a long-term safety profile on any pharmaceutical product without long-term safety data. And that takes time. Science does not move at warp speed. Science is a slow, meticulous process, or if you're an American, process. It takes time. And when you rush, mistakes happen. And on top of that, this mRNA is a platform that had never, ever before yielded an approved product. Working on it for 20 odd years, never yielded an approved product. And one of the reasons was long-term safety. So how do you avoid issues of long-term safety? Don't do any long-term safety studies, just rush it through in a few short months. It's insanity. But getting back to all those deaths I just enumerated, in the COVID era, do you know anyone who's, no one knows anyone. There was on my Facebook feed from my old high school, I had a number of friends of mine, people I actually knew from high school. And I was sharing my opinion starting right in March of 2020 that these lockdown and all this stuff is absolutely insane nonsense. And that was my non-expert view, which I shared with countless others. Look at the signatories to the Great Barrington Declaration, which was authored by a gentleman from a gentleman from Oxford, a doctor from Oxford, a doctor from Harvard, I believe, and one from Stanford. I know the one from Oxford, and I think it's Harvard. I think the other one was Stanford, but there were three prominent doctors authored this Great Barrington Declaration, and ostensibly their claim was that the lockdown measures were worse than anything COVID could ever do. And they had thousands of eminently qualified individuals signing on to their declaration. But anyway, in high school, so I'm sharing my opinions on Facebook, and I had friends of mine from high school who screamed at me and figuratively online saying, "You have to take this seriously. So-and-so," a girl I'd gone to high school with, "so-and-so has this and she's fighting for her life." And at that point, I genuinely took a step back and said, "Oh, okay. Hey, I actually know somebody who has this." Later, a week or so later, I actually was able to get in touch with this so-and-so, with this girl I had gone to high school with, woman. And we had an online conversation because she was in my friend network on Facebook. We played Scrabble games together. And I asked her, "Oh, I heard you had, how long were you in the hospital?" And I asked her how long she was in the hospital. Well, she'd never gone into hospital. She caught the bug. She worked at a long-term care facility, caught the bug, was sick, like flu-like sickness, quite sick. Anyone who's had the flu knows that it can hammer you. You feel like you're dying. And she was genuinely sick, and not wanting to take the bug home, she had isolated in a motel room north of Toronto. And that was dramatized through the game of telephone into she's fighting for her life. If I'm fighting for my life, I want to be in a hospital, not in a motel room north of Toronto or a motel room anywhere. And then I'd hear about people. There's another chap I went to high school with, played basketball with, and he told me that he had a family member in the Caribbean who had been diagnosed and died. And outside of that, those were the only two I knew. Later, by 2021, and I've mentioned this before, there was a pastor at a church in Peterborough, Ontario. I'll say the name. He posts about it on Facebook himself. The name of the church is Hill City Baptist. If you're anywhere in the Peterborough area and looking for a faithful church to gather at, look up Hill City Baptist, HILLCITY, Hill City, city on a hill. And anyway, the pastor there, he got quite sick, and actually he was hospitalized. I don't believe he was ever ventilated. However, I do know he was on oxygen because he came to church and had that portable. He wasn't able to celebrate, to lead the worship service. He was too sick. And he had one of those portable oxygen containers with the little nose piece. So those were the people I knew. There was the pastor of the church, Pastor Alex, this girl I'd gone to high school with, and then a high school friend who had a family member living in the Caribbean, and that was it. Now, contrast that with what's been happening since the jabs rolled out. And now I know of far too many people personally getting sick, and not just getting sick, but I have a family member, extended family, 38 years of age, 6 foot tall, 180 pounds. I'm 5'11" and I weigh 220-ish. He's healthier than me. He has an aerobic fitness set up in his basement. His mother lives with him because she needs a place to live, and he loves having someone looking after the house when he's working and everything. and she cooks eggplant and vegetables and rice dishes, everything incredibly healthy. He had a heart attack, 38 years of age. A former colleague of mine, 47, died in his apartment of a heart attack. My extended family member survived his heart attack. There's a local counselor in the town I live in here who was at every jab clinic in town, big rah-rah boost, jab booster. Go get your jabs. Massive heart attacks, survived, thankfully. Strokes, aneurysms. I'm hearing all kinds of just infections. There's another church I was attending here in the town where I live. I was attending there for almost a year because they were staying open. They opened up to outdoor worship in May of 2021. When all the other churches were closed in town, there was a Pentecostal church which used their back property and held outdoor worship. And I started attending, and I went there for almost a year. And I just went back, not yesterday, not Christmas Day, Sunday, but the Sunday previous. I went to worship there, and it was the mood was very somber because 3 members of the congregation had died suddenly in the previous week. They'd had 3 funerals. One gentleman was 42 years of age, 3 in 1 week. Then when I was at work, I had 3 people relate problems, health issues that they're having that are requiring medical attention that have all just popped up. The most egregious was a gentleman who I know from church as well. Can you tell I go to church a lot? And he's been diagnosed with liver, kidney, and heart damage. And the common denominator, I don't need to tell you. The guy who told me about the kidney, liver, and heart, I didn't know his status. I asked him. I know him well enough, and I said, "Are you?" And he said, "Yeah, twice Moderna." I said, "Do you think that's?" And I said, "I do. Correlation doesn't equal causation, but I'm hearing far too many stories." And he said, "Yeah, I figured." He suspected and suspects that's the reason. And so I mentioned I don't know a lot about it. People talk about things like detoxification, and one of the frequent recommendations here from those who take a homeopathic type approach is pine needle tea. So I said, you go online, you might want to read up on this detoxification. And I told him the one thing I'm hearing repeatedly is about pine needle tea. So he said he was going to check into it. But my fear going forward is that we're seeing in Ontario, and if the reporting is to be believed, and I tend to believe it, I have a certain degree of what I'll refer to as healthy skepticism, but I do think that a lot of kids are getting sick. I do believe our pediatric wards, and pediatric, you tend to think of little kids. Pediatric, as far as I understand, non-expert, pediatric refers to any child, and child legally defined as anyone under the age of 17. I mean, there's talk now of older teenage children being transferred into adult hospital ICUs because there's no room in the children's hospitals and their ICU units. They don't have the space. And so I do think this is happening. What I find somewhat ironic is the lockdown in 2020 and into 2021 was the line we heard about all the time was it was to flatten the curve so that there isn't a big surge hitting the hospital all at once and overwhelming hospital capacity. We're just trying to flatten things out so that the hospitals don't get inundated all over a very short period of time. That was the rationale. And at no time, when you look back at the reporting in 2017, 18, 19 about flu season, about hospitals routinely being over capacity as being normal. I think it was CBC or the Toronto Star ran an article that was looking back at the summer of 2019, the January to June period of 2019, and hospitals were routinely at 110, 120, 140, 150% capacity, over capacity. Hallway medicine had become the accepted norm in Ontario hospitals, piling up patients in the hallways and conference rooms because they just didn't have the space to deal with them, especially during flu season. And all of a sudden, we didn't have those problems in 2020 or 2021. And now it's back. And what I can see them doing is using lockdowns as a threat because everything has always been, in my view, everything has always been about the jabs. The lockdowns, in my view, the reason for them was to use a Noam Chomsky term, the purpose was to manufacture consent, to create the conditions in the population that would have people begging, because lockdown people, depression, suicide, the abused being forced to isolate in place, to shelter in place with their abusers, all while alcohol and weed are declared essential. People being denied cancer screenings that are, talk to anyone in oncology and ask them, what's the single most important thing, what's the biggest tool in the box for surviving a cancer diagnosis? And they'll say, early detection. If we catch it early, we can treat it. And what did we do in March, April, May, for goodness knows how long in 2020? Cancer screenings were canceled. That lump or growth that you have, that you're worried that it might be malignant, it's going to have to wait. And if it is malignant, well, we'll let it hit your lymphatic system and spread and metastasize throughout your body. So, so that by the time we do diagnose it, there's nothing we can do. And what's the ultimate goal? What's the ultimate goal? If you want to save lives, do you cancel cancer screenings? Is that going to save lives? And yet at the same time, during all this time, there was a musician from Calgary, Alberta, 40-something years of age, in 2020. He needed, I think it was a pacemaker installed or some heart procedure needed to live. And none of the hospitals, no hospital, he couldn't get anyone to perform the surgery, and he died, leaving a widow and two children, two little girls. He couldn't get the procedure he needed. But someone wanting an abortion, that we can do. There was never a lockdown on abortions. We can risk the virus spreading around for an abortion, but we can't risk the virus spreading around to screen someone for cancer so that we can catch it early and save their life, or to perform a life-saving heart procedure. Sorry, can't risk it. The contradictions have been there, and they've been apparent from day one to anyone who had their open and wasn't afraid of the deadly coronavirus. The mouse that roared, that got people to disengage their higher thought processes. But I don't know if you're still watching. I've got two people, Rhino, Aries, or rhinoceros with a different spelling. And they're asking, it's scary when you realize that all these health issues are popping up and it's just the beginning. What will happen 5 to 10 years from now? I think we're going to be seeing things get worse and worse and worse. 8 billion people on this planet. Sometime in November, they say that we crossed over the 8 billion threshold. And the thinking is in some quarters, certainly in certain branches of academia, it's held that the planet only produces enough food, energy, resources to sustain a population of around 2 billion over the long term. And that the reason we were able to get to 8 billion when we only have enough energy, resources, food, water, and everything, it's only enough to sustain 2 billion people long term. How did we get to 8? Well, they contend that the planet had, past tense of the verb, enormous reserves that had been built up, but that now we've basically depleted those reserves, and that if there isn't a massive reduction in the planet's population by 2030 or thereabouts, that we'll be going to war. Nations will go to war over things like water. That's out there. I read a study on it from the University of Texas. And there are 3 major drivers of depopulation, of population reduction, of population control: war, disease, famine. Right now, war, we have the Ukraine-Russian conflict, and I don't have an opinion one way or the other on that, what's going on over there. War, the first casualty of war is truth. Are the Russians lying? Undoubtedly. Are the Ukrainians lying? Undoubtedly. All sides lie in war, including ours. We were lied to about the Vietnam War, lied to about the first Iraq War, lied about the second Iraq War. Lies were told in World War I, for goodness sake, to demonize the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, who we normally call the Germans, press outlets in Western media to get the US on board so that they joined the war, started publishing stories about the evil Huns. That's when they started calling the Germans the Huns, so that we would associate the Germans with Attila the Hun. So the horrible Huns, they said that they were chopping off the hands of Belgian children. And it's called atrocity propaganda. Look that up if you like. Atrocity propaganda. It's as old as Roman times, and probably before that, probably going all the way back to Sun Tzu, The Art of War. So war, disease. Has something happened to the human population or a significant portion of it to weaken their natural immune systems so that they've become susceptible to all manner of reemergent cancers and newly developing cancers, organ damage, heart, liver, kidney, pancreas, goodness knows, unable to fight off infections like streptococcus, meningitis. There are loads of pathogens out there, and I'll leave you with this. Stress. I would invite you to check out the effect that stress has on the human immune system. So even if you're so-called, and I don't like this term, I genuinely do not like this term, pure blood. I do not like it at all. I do not like, I'm better than you, because I'm pure implies that others are impure, and I don't like that at all. Many of the people who got the jab did it because they felt they had no choice because their employer said, if you don't take it, you're out of work. Or someone wanted to visit a dying relative in another country and they were told, well, you can't get on a plane unless you have it. Or, a kid who is passionate about playing hockey or basketball or any sport. Well, the leagues in just about every jurisdiction, at least in Canada, and probably across the United States as well, you got to have it or you can't play. It was coercion on steroids. Hopefully, my view is forewarned is forearmed. If you know what's coming, if you know what to expect, it doesn't make it any easier necessarily, but it does soften the blow somewhat, perhaps. At least you knew it was coming. I had a family member with serious health issues a number of years ago. And an operation was required, referred to as a pericardiocentesis. And my medical degree comes from Facebook and Google. So I had no idea what a pericardiocentesis was, but heard the word, went and figured it out and typed it in and wanted to know what was the prognosis, because the doctor, in giving this to the family members, myself included, had painted a somewhat optimistic picture that this would solve a lot of problems. I wouldn't say definitive. He was very careful in his wording, but my other family members latched onto it and they were filled with hope. I was a little more circumspect. I went and looked up pericardiocentesis and I found studies that have been done that showed that the median survival rate for people who had the same health issues as my family member, that the median survival rate was something like 8 weeks. And so I knew ahead of time what to anticipate. And as it turned out, didn't even make it to that median survival period. The loss, the death was still devastating. But I think without that knowledge, as hard as it hit me, I think it would have hit me even harder. So I'll leave you with that. And I'll probably go online sometime this week, or if not, by Saturday anyway, which will be New Year's Eve. So I'll probably do one during the week. Again, thank you for the 2 likes I have already. If you want to subscribe, feel free. And sorry for rambling. I have these all categorized under live and unscripted. I'm just talking off the top of my head. So thank you, Rhinoceros, or however you say your name. I know it's a handle. It's a username. But thank you for chiming in. And Merry, Merry Christmas. I'm almost afraid to say that because some people go crazy. And I don't mean, and it's actually many Christians who go, because this whole Christmas tree and Saturnella and everything like that. For me, Christmas is a celebration of the incarnation of the Word being made flesh. I know it probably didn't happen on December 25th. I figure there's a 1 in 365 or 100 in 366 chances that it actually was on December 25th, and that's okay. Those who say that we should celebrate Jesus's birth every day, I agree. Anyway, God bless, and we'll talk to you later, maybe once before the year ends. Night now.